Perfect. I'm at the Four Seasons Hotel in Austin, Texas with Tim Burton, who has brought Frankenweenie to Fantastic Fest.
Do you think you're going to take any time to sneak into the theater with the dogs as well and see how they like it?
I'm more curious about that, yeah. I've gotten responses where people have said that their dogs like my films, so.
I saw the movie last night, and it's such an absolute love letter to monsters. I mean, which is sort of very much in line with what you do, but this one especially really is, and not just the classics, but it's all the way through the entire history of monsters.
Yeah.
It brought up something really interesting to me as an artist, as a visual artist. You're, in this movie, Sparky, you're riffing on that classic Jack Pierce Frankenstein's monster makeup. What is it about that makeup that continues to still speak to us?
Well, it's like art. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, that's what I grew up on those movies, and he was just. In fact, I even think I wanted to be a makeup artist based on him because he's just there was a beauty in his work, and the thing is about that kind of thing. You think somebody's being covered up with makeup, but actually something comes through.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
And that's a real that's like an art. I mean, and it's such a beautiful art form, and those characters are just such. Visually memorable. I mean, they stay with you, from when you were a child. You don't even have to look at them; they're still in your mind.
It's the most iconic. I mean, there's no Frankenstein's monster has bolts. That's it. And there's no other way to do it.
And then you realize just how out there it all was. It was quite extreme. Those makeups.
Right. Well, it's interesting because when Frankenstein first came out, the monster was considered incredibly grisly.
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called Mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men.
I mean, audiences were upset by the visage, and now today it sells children's cereal, and it's sort of interesting to me in that it sort of speaks also to the evolution of this project, because when you first did the short of Frankenweenie, it was really too dark for Disney at the time.
Well, it always surprised me because it really isn't. I mean, it was like the whole point. Because I grew up on Disney movies, and I often had to remind them do you ever see Snow White or Pinocchio or any of these other movies that
Bambi,
the company was founded on? I mean, absolutely. So I find that an interesting dynamic. This time it was great because they accepted the black and white, no problem, and at the heart of it, for me, it's always been a Disney movie, and the story about a boy and his dog. It just happens to be the Frankenstein story, which to me didn't seem like that much of a stretch.
Sparky! I can't believe it! I can fix that.
Well, do you think that sort of culturally we've kind of come to a different place where we deal with monsters now? I mean, in terms of when this was a little dark for Disney to today, where it's so mainstream, this is going to be one of the blockbuster releases, and it's all about kids bringing back animals from the dead. I mean, culturally, have we sort of embraced monsters in a different way?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I always did.
Right.
I mean, my parents said before I could walk, I was watching monster movies. So, and so for me, I always related to them. I always thought they were the most human of the characters.
Right.
I mean, because usually, you had great actors like Boris Karloff, people, and all the other characters were sort of B actors. So the monsters always had the emotion. The ones that I could relate to. So. It's hard for me to know. I mean, obviously, there's so many different kinds of, monsters. A lot more gory. A lot more. Lots of tentacles and lots of things and stuff. But for me, that's why I like the simplicity of those. There's just something that is the image is iconic.
There's an interesting thing is that, you obviously come back to the sympathetic side of monsters.
Hold me.
I think that's what's great about especially the classic Universal, is that these are monsters, generally speaking, who aren't in control or they're being provoked into what's happening, but they do still have a dangerous egg. And so as a kid, obviously the sympathetic stuff is something what you keep returning to, but as a kid, was the dangerous edge something that spoke to you too, that feeling like...
Well, yeah, because I think that's how you feel. I mean, it sort of taps into also different sides of emotions. I mean, that's what I think before movies, that's what fairy tales or folk tales did. They had a dark edge to them, and it's especially when you're a kid, you come into the world, things are abstract, and life isn't all la la la. It's there's darkness, and even in your own as a person, you have either depressed thoughts or you have sides to you, and monster movies were to me the safest way to explore those impulses and those feelings that most people have, even as a child.
So with Frankenweenie, it's interesting because these characters, visually speaking, they're Tim Burton characters. You look at these designs, and they are your design. Hitchcock had something really interesting to say about directorial style. He said style is self-plagiarism. So sort of where do you stand on on that thing? Sort of your style is very specific.
Yeah. Well, I don't think too. I try to sort of exercise that out of my thinking because, I mean, it's like you spend your whole life trying to become a human being, and then you become a thing. It's kind of, again, it becomes the sort of monster theme again, coming back into play. So I try not to think about myself and like, oh, I'm this or I do that, or this is my thing, or this is what people expect, or whatever. I just banish it from my thoughts.
Fantastic!
I mean, I probably revisit themes over and over again, but I try not to think that way. I try to treat it like, well, this is something interesting to me, and just, treat each project as its own thing, and
Well, it's obviously interesting to a lot of people. I mean, I was at Comic-Con this year, and your panel in Hall H was amazing because those kids that got up to the mic, I mean, some of them were crying. Your stuff has so deeply sort of moved people.
That's the most meaningful thing to me. Whatever box office or critical, whatever. I mean, to me, the most special thing is if you touch, even if it's like one person. That to me means all the difference to me in the world. Right. I mean, that almost makes me cry sometimes because I feel so like. It's so nice to have a positive effect on somebody.
Well, it's interesting. We're both kind of older guys, and we grew up in a world where when you were a monster kid, especially in some neighborhoods, you were the only monster kid. Yeah. And today, that isn't the way. The internet has sort of brought people together. Yeah. So, I mean, it's sort of interesting. It's interesting to sort of see that the stuff that we felt like when we were younger, we were among the only people. It's much bigger.
The only thing we had was like famous monsters of Filmland, and
Faraci Ackerman, he was
that
the
was
guy.
That was it. And I think I was probably the only guy in my street that was getting that magazine. I always found it strange that you were, just because you liked monster movies, you were thought of as a kind of a weirdo, which is strange because it's like, well, what's so I mean, there's monster movies. Why don't you treat people like Westerns like that?
Right, right.
It's like, it just didn't quite make sense.
So if we had to go back and pick this desert island thing, one universal classic monster movie to take with you, which is the one?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's hard.
Do you go for one of the solo ones, one of the crossover?
Well, I mean, the crossover ones are funny because there's something funny about it. I mean, at the time, I loved the idea, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Right. I mean, they're not the best. I mean, the best ones are the pure ones. I mean, Frankenstein is probably, that's a pure movie, and Dracula. Those are pure, even as much as I love Bride of Frankenstein, I still think I like
So you go Frankenstein over Bride?
I mean, that image, the Bride of Frankenstein image, is like one of my favorite image of all time. So I can't. Really,
We Belong Dead is just that's just one of those shattering.
There's some elements to it that are probably the best. I can't choose. They're too. I would feel betraying one of them somehow.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking time. I really appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you.
The movie's a lot of fun.
Thanks,
it's beautiful looking. Cool.
Victor, let's go. Hang on. Mr. Whiskers is trying to tell us something. Did you get that out of the litter box?
Well, I'm Devin Faraci. This is Badass Digest. Tim Burton, Frankenweenie, in theaters this weekend.
Oh my.